Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Jade Walk Away. Today is going to be one of the most interesting conversations that we've had on this show because I've got an incredible guest. So today we're taking a deep dive into the science behind the 3 key brain changes of a woman's life. And to discuss this topic, we have the internationally recognized leader and expert in this field, Monash University Professor Jade Kulkarni. She is one of Australia's medical greats when it comes to advancing women's hormonal and mental health care, and in particular, challenging past and existing models when it comes to female-specific conditions such as PMDD, postnatal depression, and menopause. And her world-first research in hormones and mental health has led to the development of new treatments for women's mental health. And along with her colleagues, she developed and established Australia's first women's mental health hospital at Cabrini Health in September 2021. She is also the founder and director of 2 research centres, Her Centre Australia, which is dedicated to understanding and treating mental illnesses experienced by women, and the Monash Alfred Psychiatry Research Centre. My goodness, the amount of things you have done. I'm so honoured to have you on. Welcome, Jayshree.
Oh, thank you, Jade, and thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm delighted to be here. And again, doing the research and publishing it in our learned scientific journals is important, but it doesn't get there. It doesn't get out there. So this is great that people like yourself who are in the healthcare industry can help us to actually share the information and reach a lot of women who probably don't know about the connection between hormones and mental health.
Because you even talk about it's hard to get funding for these areas too, right?
Yeah. Do you want me to sort of go on for 3 hours about this? But it is awful. It is really, really awful. So again, it becomes this issue of, hang on, what's so different about women? There's lots of mental health research that goes on, and then you go back and you have to explain that no, this is different. Women's mental health is different. The causes and the treatments of different mental health conditions that women experience require a completely different approach to understand in the first place, and then to manage in a very collaborative way, but to bring in the whole woman. There's no point just looking at one bit. We have to look at the whole woman in the context of her environment, like her work, her family, her past, and the trauma story and all the rest of it. And when we sit back and we look at the marches that are going on in every state at the moment, it is about the fact that women are saying, hang on, we've had enough of not being considered to be important enough that there is funding and resourcing of women-specific health and mental health treatments. So that's what this is about. It's actually saying, look, you want to improve outcomes, you've got to take a different approach, take a gendered lens to all of medicine, in particular mental health.
Oh my goodness, I could speak about this for 3 hours too. So we are definitely on the same page here. I'm interested to know what made you passionate about this area.
I think my passion particularly came from the very early stages of my registrar training, when I met in the old, awful backwards of a terrible mental health asylum. Thank goodness we don't have those now. But it was grim, it was dark, it was horrible. And there were women who were there for decades. And, I spent a lot of time hearing their stories, and they were the ones who alerted me to many of them saying, it's my hormones, doc. And that statement came from women who had been okay until they had children, and then postnatally developed a mental ill health condition. And the other groups who said, I was fine until menopause, and now, it's awful. And then, of course, there was a group who had a whole lot of trauma and abuse, and that had been somehow overlooked as well. So the story of the hormones really my passion came from the actual individuals that I met, amazing individuals who, despite everything, back then, and also even right through to now when I see women in my clinic, who are intensely resilient, and despite all the horrors, still manage to keep going and put one foot in front of the other and raise children and do work. And, it's extraordinary. So I am passionate about seeing if we can make life a little bit easier, a little bit more enjoyable for the women who've had a rough trot and then particularly have difficulties with their hormones. It's also about, hang on, who said women are less important than men? And why do we assume that the archetypal patient is a Caucasian white male? It doesn't make sense. And that's how medicine had been taught. So, I mean, I can remember lectures that were very clearly about that, and it doesn't apply. A lot of the stuff didn't apply, particularly to women and particularly to women of different cultures and our Indigenous women. I mean, there's a whole reason to look at the individual in front of you and try to have a gendered lens to help the outcomes improve.
This is actually really reminding me of the neurodivergent space. I was diagnosed ADHD last year by a psychiatrist, and it's opened this whole can of worms of the way that we haven't been included in the research until recent times, and why it's been so underdiagnosed and all these kinds of things. And yeah, you just keep adding all these more layers on where females really missed out in the research for such a long time.
Absolutely, and I think we've got to start back in the early life as well, because what we have learned from neuroscience research is that, unfortunately, girls' brains are more vulnerable to their external world. And in a child, that is going to be their family and what they see and what they experience in their early stages of life in brain development has significant impacts. And unfortunately, girls have a more sensitive brain. So this is why in the situations where there is perhaps emotional invalidation, emotional abuse, physical abuse, and the worst of all, sexual abuse of girls growing up, those impacts are actually manifest by changes in brain chemistry and brain circuitry as the girl grows up. And then mental health conditions can set in, including neurodivergent conditions like ADHD, but also a propensity to be more sensitive to hormonal shifts, which is what we're talking about here is the PMDD, premenstrual depression, or postnatal depression after giving birth, or the big one, perimenopausal, around the menopause transition, that there's a lot of awful mental health problems. So they're just 3 time points, but underneath that, in some women, not all, but in some women, can be an early life issue that hasn't really ever been properly recognised or addressed.
So can you speak to then those 3 key brain changes and what is actually happening in the brain at those times, starting with menarche?
Yeah, so menarche is the first ever period, and puberty, I think the average age is about 11 or 11.5 or something like that in Australia. But puberty itself is not just a simple process. It is a gradually increasing level of estrogen in the brain, but with all the precursor hormones that are produced in the pituitary in response to the hypothalamus. So there's this whole engine chugging away in the brain, which suddenly gets this sort of kick into top gear to actually then produce secondary sexual characteristics like breast, pubic hair, bigger clitoris, and all the adult look, in terms of body. But along with that is a whole bunch of brain stuff happening, because these hormones that are responsible for the puberty process, which is estrogen, progesterone as the end products, and testosterone, are under the control of luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, and they're releasing factors in the hypothalamus. So all of these hormones, which we thought were just about things that happen under the waist, are also called neurosteroid hormones for a reason. They are potent in the brain. That's where the neuro bit comes from, is that these are potent brain hormones. And so they are driving a whole bunch of the neurochemicals like serotonin, dopamine, noradrenaline, and acetylcholine, a whole bunch of them, because they're big, potent drivers of chemistry that the brain chemicals that I just mentioned then drive the mood, they drive higher learning, they drive memory, they drive also things like irritability, hostility, all sorts of different things are going on. How one perceives the environment and then self-esteem, for example, is mediated through chemical pathways. See, we think, oh yeah, it's just like if there's stress in the outer world, then we feel stressed and that's what it is. But it's a whole chemical process going on that is about the stress and how it's perceived and converted into brain actions. I sometimes talk about the mind, but that's a really sort of almost an ideological concept. It's really, the mind is something that we've kind of romanticized and put in there. It's great in literature, but it's not a thing in neuroscience, because what we're actually referring to are those bits of the brain that are about feeling and emotions and behavior and cognition, and memories and all of that, those thinking bits that we collectively call the mind. It's just it's just bits of the brain, as distinct from the bits that make your arms move or your legs move or govern your heart rate and so on. So in puberty, all of that is affected because there's these rapid fluctuations in the hormones going eventually in an upward direction, but it's a bit of a sawtooth pattern on the way up. It's not just a kind of smooth at low level and then suddenly you wake up and it's at high level. It doesn't work like that. And so in all the turbulence and perturbations of the hormones at the hypothalamus, pituitary, and the gonadal levels is a whole bunch of mental health stuff. And we know that our adolescent girls, some of them really go through a tough time. Some of them actually experience all sorts of things. Like they can experience a bit of an eating disorder for a while, and then they can experience something that looks almost manic, and then they can experience, sometimes women almost have early psychosis in the early stages, and then they can be depressed and go through the whole gamut in a week. And, the parents are sort of like, what is going on here? So there's a lot that goes on in the unstressed, untraumatized brain anyway. Now, you throw some stress, some early life trauma in there, and you've got a whole other thing happening in that the brain of this girl, and she's still a girl, she's still in her 13, 14, up to 15 or 16 age group, will suddenly be kind of thrown for a six, because there are all sorts of different chemical transitions going on. But the chemistry, like the serotonin system, the dopamine, also drives the brain circuits. So this is like the hardwiring of the computer. And it's really interesting. It's fascinating to see the development of new circuits. If you want to develop a new circuit, this is what you do. You're going to memorize. Say you're learning a new language. You repeat and repeat and repeat the word, repeat the phrase, repeat the word, repeat the phrase. With those repetitions, you actually lay down a new circuit of learning. That's how you're learning. And you keep reinforcing it every time you read something in that language, if you're learning a new language or you hear that word or whatever. That's how we learn. You can learn good things or you can learn bad things. And the same mechanism applies. So sometimes what is going on in the pubertal brain is that there are a lot of new circuits, and some of the new circuits are not very helpful, and some of the circuits are necessary. So sometimes people talk about pruning difficulties in the ADHD or neurodivergent person, that they can't kind of focus because they're not chopping out those circuits that are unhelpful. So, for example, if you're sitting down, or I think you're sitting down now, you can feel the pressure of the chair on your bottom. So what you do is, if you're focusing on me talking, is you tune out that message that's going to your brain. But somebody who's got a lot of circuits is not able to do that, which is why they're having such difficulty in school, especially if it's really boring subject, because they're not able to focus out the things that they don't need. That is a task of adolescence, pruning. It's called dendritic pruning or brain circuit pruning. Think pruning like your roses, you chop off the deadheads. So that's what you kind of have to do in your brain. And some people can't do it because there's slippage in their chemistry because of the stress and the trauma and other things they've experienced, or because of a genetic factor. We don't know the whole story there, but something happens that they're not actually able to prune and direct their focus. There's two groups that we really have to be careful of, though, here. There is the group who have terrible, in girls I'm talking about, terrible sexual abuse and so on. They have a problem with concentration because they're living life on high alert, because that's what they have to do to survive. They've been assaulted or something horrible has happened, so they have to live on high alert to prevent themselves from having this assault again. Now, their brains are set at that kind of high level of alert, which means they're not going to like to sit in a class with boring geography going on and pay attention to that, because they're really not able to concentrate on the things that are not life preserving, because that's where their thinking is. Their hormones are also out of kilter because they're pumping out cortisol, which is our fight or flight type hormone, because they're in that terribly anxious, high alert mode. And so they're pumping out cortisol, which then screws up the other pituitary hormones and hypothalamic pituitary gonadal hormones. This is another group who are very sensitive to their hormonal flips and flops in the menstrual cycle. So for some women, PMDD goes alongside what we call complex post-traumatic stress disorder. This is the girl who's had something horrible happening at home. Then she probably goes on to have some bullying at school. She may end up in having a relationship with a terrible abusive partner. And so, you can see the trauma after trauma, and that each time keeps throwing her back into an unhelpful brain hormone, brain chemistry, and brain circuitry situation. And the message giving herself is, I'm hopeless, I'm pathetic, I'm bad, I'm useless. And she's repeating this to herself. She's finding evidence for that. And somebody's telling her that. And so that circuit, the poor self-esteem circuit, is building and building. So that's her situation. So there's a lot that goes on in the brain. It can be nice, healthy development moving forward, or there can be issues because of factor X in some people that just causes blips that goes off into neurodivergent land, or depression, or schizophrenia, for example. Or there is trauma-related issues that then drives the brain, cortisol and hormones and circuitry into a different pathway. So, and I've simplified it because it's not as simple as that. But our adolescent girls are going through hell and high water with their brain changes, and I don't think we recognize it as that, because it's a time of great social change, no doubt, and their physical change, but there's a hell of a lot of mental change going on as well. Plus, also, you've got other hormones operating. I mean, I talked about the gonadal hormones, but there's growth hormones as well. And this is where the sleepiness comes from. Parents really get annoyed with their adolescent for not getting out of bed until 12, 1 p.m. But adolescents actually do need more sleep, because this is when their growth hormone activation's going on, and it does create the extra sleep. So as distinct from the middle-aged to older parent whose kind of sleep needs are declining, you've got the adolescent whose sleep needs are increasing, which is not a nice, easy household to then actually be able to negotiate. So
you're actually just reminding me of just everything in my life, basically, like from my teenage years of the hormonal rage, we like to call it, and the sleep, and then your parents being like, "Get out of bed, Jade," but you're like, "Oh, but I feel like I need this sleep," and then I'm a mum as well, and relating to the changes there as well, and oh my goodness, like at the bare minimum, if people can get one thing out of this, it's actually probably validation for being a woman, that what we're experiencing is for the most part normal, or there are other factors out of our control that are causing it.
That's really great that you said that, because I know I've been sort of rambling all over the place here, but I think it is that you've got these two things that are operating here. And do not underestimate the emotional trauma that some girls experience. It is profound in some situations, particularly when there's, the stories that we hear in my clinic are sometimes just, I won't traumatize your listeners, but some of the other stories are things that people think, oh yeah, but they start off with saying, I had a happy childhood, and then you dig and you find out that what she thinks is happy childhood is what I would call trauma and other people would call trauma. And you actually say, wait a minute, that's not normal. That's not how everybody else was experiencing things. So again, that doesn't mean that she will not be traumatized at a biological level. She is, even though she's covering it up and going, no, I'm good, I'm cool, I'm fine. That's the resilience. It's extraordinary. But we've got to be aware of the traumas that young people experience, girls experience in their early life, which can be of an emotional nature, which can be really, really damaging at various levels.
Well, I think I read a stat the other day that I think it's now 1 in 4 women report they've been sexually abused.
Yep. It's
And
awful. It used to be 1 in 5, so it's actually getting worse, not better.
And also, I'm sure people underreport or, don't report. So how do we know how accurate those stats are as well?
Yes,
It's
absolutely. It's a big, big problem in Australia, which is a very lucky, wealthy country, all things compared, and yet there is this issue, and often it is about the difficulties in kids not really having that security of who's at home, who's going to be at home, who's interested in me, um, who that running home from school with that awful drawing that they've done at school, but being able to have your mum or dad say, oh, that's the best piece of artwork we've ever seen, and put it on the fridge. That simple stuff means a lot to a little child. Yes, you and I can agree they're awful. I've got this amazingly awful macaroni stuck on a paper plate with sparkly things on it, and from my child ages ago. And yes, that comes out and gets hung on the awful Christmas tree decorations that we have. They're all made by my kids ages and ages ago. But every year, even now, they're adults. They love seeing those awful things hanging on the tree. So, and I don't care how old you are, you want to be validated. I want to be validated. I love it when you say you like my work. That validates me. So it's not that we're needy and pathetic or any of that stuff. It's the human condition. Humans like to be validated, and especially children. They want to be given that secure love, not an anxious, I'll give you love if you give me something back. Not that, but a secure love.
This is why I love when people say that having children is one of the greatest teachers, because I've dived into a lot about attachment science since becoming a mother myself. And you really do realize, like you say, the needs that they're asking for, that sometimes we can struggle as an overstimulated, empty cup parent to provide. And we're trying so hard. But then you think about it, it's like, these aren't much different to the needs I want as an adult as well.
Yes. Yes.
And yet, for some reason, we create this different set of rules for children.
Absolutely. We all still need that mental fridge that we can hang our awful pieces of artwork on and be congratulated on. We still do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So on this note, I'm interested to know, are there any things that parents can do from a really young age to try and set better foundations for these significant brain development phases in their life, such as puberty?
Yes. So I think it's a testing time at puberty for many parents. And just take that simple example of the sleeping adolescent. I think it is difficult to strike a balance, but conversation with the adolescent is always going to be vital. And it's really interesting that some of the best conversations can happen when you're driving your adolescent child around to somewhere, because you're kind of in the car together, and you don't have to be sitting staring at each other as if you're in some kind of therapy session. You're staring at the road, thank goodness, but the adolescent child should take the earpods out and have a conversation about, how much sleep do you think you need? And I only, and you can share, I only need about 6 or 7 hours of sleep. And so what do you think you need? Well, yeah, you do need a lot more than me, but how are we going to get you to be able to be part of the family? Because, family lunch on Sunday, it'd be great to have you there. So it's a conversation and it's explaining rather than get out of bed or I'll throw cold water on you or, that sort of stuff. It is difficult. It's not easy, especially if you've got your own needs and you're rushing to try and get something done or whatever it is, and you will have. But I think conversations are always critical, and having some time where it is, hey, I'll share my world with you, you share your world with me, is really important to keep that open. Meal times
Mm.
are really critical too. Meal times are good because it's a time when people should be somewhat relaxed. We shouldn't be eating in front of the TV. It should be a time when there's actual communication time. Like, what did you do in your day? Because in being interested in somebody's world is a good thing, and that means to that person, oh, she's taking an interest in me. I must be valuable, or I must be valued, or I've got some interesting things to say. A little bit harder with adolescent boys than girls because girls like to talk more than boys. But again, it is that encouragement of that conversation.
I love this so much, and even the way that my twins are almost 3 years old, and I already see the way that they mirror back to me obviously the things that I've learnt to do with them. And I did the Circle of Security course, and really learning to give them autonomy and get down on their level. And yesterday I had a really heartwarming moment that was reflected back to me. And in fact, so I'm due for my period in a couple of days. And yesterday I spent the whole day with the girls, and they're going through this time where they're both fighting more. And you even reminded me earlier about when you repeat things over and over to learn a new circuit, and that's exactly where they're at. It's like, what's this, mum? What's this, mum? What's this? But over and over and over again. And we were driving home, and one of my girls kept saying, "Where's the cap? Where's the bottle cap, mum? Where's the bottle cap?" And I was like, "I'm not sure, honey. I think we left it behind. Where's the bottle cap?" And it just kept going on. I was like, "I don't know where the bottle cap is," and I lost it. But then I instantly said, "I'm really sorry that I snapped, but I'm really losing it right now because I'm irritable and I don't mean to." And Maisie goes to me, "It's not your fault." And that was just so heartwarming, because that's what I've said to them so many times when they've had a challenging situation, and I've said, "It's okay, it's not your fault."
Isn't that wonderful? Because I think it's important also that you've given an explanation for,
Mm.
hey, you're not a godlike creature who's never going to lose their temper or whatever.
Mhm.
It's okay if you are upset and angry, but then it's also important to apologize. And that's
Mhm.
another thing. Parents apologizing is a good thing because it
Mhm.
teaches the kid that that's also what's a normal response to having lost it or whatever, which is going to happen more than once. But it's also, I think, again, it's a real situation that we have to also accept and not feel guilty about, because that's what I also hear is mums then saying, "Oh, I feel so bad," and then try and overcompensate. So
Mm.
kids like parents to be somewhat same as much as possible, not overdoing it and not underdoing it. And sometimes people do lurch from one pole to the other, and then you've got the kid who's sort of like, this is a head spin. I don't know whether it's fantastic, I'm fantastic because mum just said that, or whether I'm the devil because mum just said that. So it is important that you kind of try and keep it as same as you can, which is not easy.
Mm. Absolutely. And I love that whole concept of the rupture and repair. Like, if you model that to them, that we are going to rupture, especially being a woman with different hormonal challenges, that rupture is going to happen, but how do we repair after? So I guess this leads me into the perfect segue into the second brain change of our life, which is motherhood. So
Yep.
what's
And
happening?
you actually touched on PMDD too, which is
Yes.
premenstrual
Oh, yes.
premenstrual depression.
Mm.
This is another condition that, in particular, is where women are very sensitive to the hormonal fluctuations. And there are hormonal fluctuations with a downturn in estrogen and progesterone prior to having a menstrual bleed. And some women, not all women, some women have then changes in the brain chemistry, which leads to a depression. In some women, this is a very significant severe depression. In about 80% of women, they have PMS, which is premenstrual syndrome, which is physical health changes, bloating, headaches, feeling snappy and irritable. But in 20% of women of reproductive age, they get a full-blown depression, major depression, rage, tearfulness, brain fog, can't think through things, and in the worst cases, suicide. So it's a sort of spectrum, but PMDD is a terrible major depression, but it responds to hormone strategies. So that is a really important condition to remember. If there is a genetic inheritance of PMDD, excuse me, but it takes a trauma to then bring the gene out to be active.
Oh, that's interesting because I was reading about is it the one gene I was reading about was one of the serotonergic receptors? Is that one of the genes that they believe is associated with?
No, it's actually a completely identified gene complex called the ESC, E2 ESC comb of zest gene complex. And this
Cool.
gene complex is in 56% of women who have PMDD. You can identify it, but it doesn't create the serotonin, which is what you're talking about. So you're talking about the action of the gene on the serotonin receptor systems that stimulates that particular response. So the gene itself can lie dormant in women who don't have a particular trauma that brings it out. And guess what the biggest trauma is? Childbirth. So some women don't have PMDD until they actually have their children. And then they experience the PMDD. Other women can have PMDD that just comes on out of the blue. And again, it's about, what's the precipitating factor there? We don't know, but they've got a genetic predisposition to it. So PMDD is a real entity. It is really devastating for the women who have significant PMDD, but it responds to hormone treatment. And we use a pill called Zoli, which is a nice oral contraceptive pill. There are some real horrors on the market. So when we talk about the oral contraceptive pill, we've got to remember that they're not all the same. In fact, they're all very different. So I always tell women if they're going to utilize the pill and then she experiences depression on the pill, she's right. She's dead right. She needs to get off that one and try another one. So different women have vulnerabilities to that. So that's the PMDD bit, but you asked me about postnatal or perinatal, which is the mental health problems during pregnancy, which is the antenatal, and then the problems after childbirth, which is the postnatal depression and anxieties, and in the worst cases, the psychosis. And this is really interesting because we've found we don't particularly work in PND, postnatal depression particularly, but the research that's been discovered here is all about the placenta. Fascinating. It's the only time an adult grows a whole new organ. When you think of that, we've got this entire organ called the placenta that is grown in an adult woman. It wasn't there before and it won't be there after she's given birth. I mean, how amazing is that? But people always thought that the placenta was just kind of this barrier and that there were messages going from the mum to the fetus and, good stuff, the nutrients going from mum to fetus. It's quite ridiculous the way we've been so narrow in thinking because, of course, stuff goes back from the fetus to the mum. And what we've also learned is the placenta itself is another brain. There are layers in the placenta that operate like a hypothalamus and a pituitary and pumping out the hormones. So you've got a fetal brain that's pumping out hormones and the end organs, whether it's a penis or a gonads, testes, or whether it's ovaries in the fetus, pumping out hormones. You've got mum pumping out huge changes in hormones that are pregnancy hormones. And now you've got a placenta that's also pumping out hormones. So all three of these brains, in inverted commas, are working together, we hope, to ensure all of the bits of development of the fetus happen. But it's not surprising that there are mental health issues for the mother, during all of this. It's intensely complicated and it's intensely dynamic. But my goodness, there are huge connections going on between the brain in the brain of the mother, between all of these hormone signals and the chemistry and the brain circuitry, and then what effects that has on her. So I'm always amazed that actually anyone makes it through pregnancy. We're kind of intact, and we all do. But yep, there you go.
So am I. Every time I learn something like this, I'm just like, I don't even know how I'm alive, to be honest. And so you talk about how the brain physically changes in the third trimester, and it's not like it bounces back. It is permanently changed, right?
There are some bits that are permanently changed. So, for example, there's immune factors, and this is where it's important to think about the messages that go from fetus through the placenta to the mother, because for ages we didn't think about that. But when you think about it, the fetus is half alien to the mother because half the DNA is not hers. So this is a little foreign body. And so the immune system has to rejig so that our immune systems are programmed to get rid of foreign bodies. That's how we fight, bacteria and everything else. We get rid of it. So the immune system has to really rejig to not get rid of half of this foreign body. And what happens is that change is there forevermore in the mother. And the change is pronounced if the baby is a boy, because that is even a further alien to the woman, because now you've got this Y chromosome floating around in the uterus, which is a different situation and carries different, it actually governs different hormonal strategies and so on in the fetus that are required. And so that also, it has an impact forevermore. So the mother's immune system, and we're talking immune system in the brain as well as body, is impacted by this. And also, you have the other temporary changes, some of which are really scary on the female brain. By scary, I mean if you look at scans of pregnant brain, mothers' pregnant brains in the third trimester, you see shrinkage of the grey matter, which is scary. The reason for that is because during the third trimester, there are massive hormone shifts, particularly with the progesterone. Progesterone makes your pelvis nice and slack and loose, so the ligaments are floppier. So it's preparing for childbirth. The whole pelvis is preparing for childbirth. But that same hormone has an effect in the brain. Progesterone in the brain is the anti-anxiety hormone in big doses. And that's what happens in third trimester. That's why the chill sort of third trimester feeling is often something that women describe. But it can go that one step too far where women say, I can't remember how to turn my computer on. There's that kind of very laid back feel in some women, not all women. But then after childbirth, after a period of time, that grey matter shrinkage comes back so that you then get a recovery. But, that's quite massive. You can actually see these changes that are occurring. Then we have the issues of women who develop postnatal depression. It's a very, very sad depression because it robs the woman of that very important bonding and joy and awful stuff. And it's often hormone mediated. So what we think is happening is the progesterone is the big culprit here. There's a metabolite of progesterone called allopregnanolone, and it's a big metabolite that switches on and off the brain mechanisms for control of mood, control of anxiety. And so in the third trimester and close to after the baby's born, these shifts are supposed to happen in the switch between the pre and the post situations of the allopregnanolone. And in some women, for some reason, and there might be some genetics involved, there might be that extra sensitivity or vulnerability to hormonal shifts in the women who've got some early life trauma and they've been running along on high cortisol all their life, or just factor X. It happens that lovely switch doesn't happen, and then you can get this terrible postnatal depression. And the worst thing I think that we've done for ages and ages is to assume that all of this is only psychological. Oh, look, the poor dear has suddenly got this whole life change. She was this competent businesswoman, and now, first time mum, she doesn't have control over her life because the baby's controlling when feeds, doesn't sleep, and not sleeping is never good for anybody. But I think we've missed the boat a bit on the biology that's going on here, as well as, so I come back to it, that holistic view. Look at the biology, look at the psychology, and look at the social or environmental context, because all of that is important. And I think postnatal and perinatal disorders, we need to step up a bit more with the biology. There's stuff happening, which is good. There's a new medication treatment that is an actual allopregnanolone derivative. So we're going down the hormone pathway for treatment in postnatal disorders. And I think the next 5 years, there should be a whole sort of wholesale change, because at the moment, the woman who's got postnatal depression is primarily treated with antidepressants and even ECT or shock treatment.
Oh my gosh, really?
It's a common treatment in postnatal depression, because the idea is you want to just get things back under her control as quickly as possible. And that's what the textbooks have always been about postnatal depression. So,
what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, look, I'm not a great fan of ECT. I'm not a great anti-fan either. So I'm like, okay, if there is a clinical indication and need, and sometimes in very severe postnatal depression, it is a clinical need, that's okay. But I wouldn't be splashing it around, for example. And I think certainly I'm not a great fan at all in the menopause depression, which we'll talk about next, because there's already cognitive issues and we don't want them to get worse. So that's my concern. We do have other brain stimulation techniques. There's transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is using a magnetic field, which is a lot more gentle, but it sounds scarier than it is. But it's the person's wide awake. It's not a general anesthetic and so on. But again, you've got to target what is the need. What does she want? What does the person want here? What's the context? And I do think whatever we do, we've got to get on top of the mental health of the new mum as quickly as possible, because you don't want to stuff up that early life bonding issues and the attachment. The attachment is really important. So
sorry, you go.
So that's critical. That I think the new hormone exploration treatment or new hormone treatments might actually promise us a whole better outcome.
So are there any preventative measures at all that can be put in place to prevent postnatal depression, or is it just all just down to luck?
Well, I mean, look, obviously everything is worse for the woman who doesn't have support and who has, the worst scenarios are the women who live in violent relationships, and violence, we know, gets worse when the woman is pregnant, which is just horrendous. You would think that, there'd be extra love and attention for the pregnant woman, but no. In some relationships where there is a tendency to violence, it has got even worse when she's pregnant, because, we can hypothesize about, his needs are not met, et cetera, et cetera. But, I don't excuse any of that, and I think it's just awful. So, yes, of course, the woman who doesn't have support, who doesn't herself get nurtured in a physical sense, in an emotional sense, doesn't feel special or made to feel special, because this is, my goodness, she's bringing a whole new other person into this world. It's a big deal. And just because millions of women do it, it doesn't mean it's not a big deal. It is a big deal. And so you want every pregnant woman to have all of that, to have good nutrition, to have good folate, to have all the vitamins, to not drink, to not smoke, to not use street drugs. That those things are protective for her and the fetus and the baby, developing. So we do need to take care of all of that. She does need good antenatal care. She's got to make sure that blood pressure's under control. All of that stuff is really critical. But for the rest of it, I think we cross our fingers, cross everything we can cross, and hope for the damn best. And usually, you get. I think we need to also be a little bit more proactive with the woman who's got PMDD in the background. Like if she's had a shocking PMDD, she's more likely to then have postnatal depression. And so, again, just being on standby so that there can be proper mental health care quickly rather than letting it just explode and then become really severe. It's always easier to intervene early on rather than later on. Diet's important for the pregnant woman and for her brain. I'm not just talking about, nutrition in terms of the developing baby, but for her as well. Because many women feel horribly depressed if they don't have enough iron or B12. So whether they take supplements or whether they actually look at what they're doing with their food, for their mental health, it's really important because you've got to feed your brain good fuel. Otherwise, you're trying to ask this complex machine to run on totally awful input. Like, if your diet's completely junk food and not much else, that's not going to help your mental health.
Especially another one that I always explain to patients is the DHA levels, from the omega-3. Your baby's going to be prioritized to first and foremost. So if you're already not getting in enough DHA, which a lot of people don't, then that's going to be taken from the brain. And then, of course, you're not going to feel mentally alert and you're going to get that baby brain and so on. Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's really critical though, because we forget about the mum sometimes when the baby's born. All the visitors go gooing and garring all over the baby, and that's true. The baby is very cute, but there's a woman here who needs extra care and attention postnatally, especially if she's breastfeeding. Well, anyway, she needs lots of care and attention, but the breastfeeding will also preferentially, you're damn right, the baby will get its needs met, and the poor woman will become this dehydrated, sort of deplete of vitamins and minerals wreck unless she's actually looking after that. That does not help the mental health one bit.
Absolutely. I love that we are now moving into a time where postpartum doulas are becoming more popular, where, people are actually prioritizing some funds to have someone to come into the house and support people, especially, when I had newborn twins and my family live interstate and my ex-husband at the time was busy with work and it was extremely hard time. And I'm so grateful to have such incredible friends that are also very acutely aware of this kind of thing and they would send me meals and things like that. But I know that's not the case for a lot of people.
I think it is important, though, to remember that it does take a village to raise a child, and it's a village that you can put together yourself with friends and others, or if you're lucky enough that you've got your own village with your own extended family around you. But it's not a one person easy job. There will be one person who is the key, no doubt, but she or he needs support, and in this case it was you. So I'm glad you got a network of your village.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I feel so lucky. And then even then with that support, I still felt like there wasn't enough support. And it just made me think of all those people who truly don't have anyone. It's really sad, I think, the way in our Western society we're such a segregated, when birth happens, it's just not that support that we need.
Absolutely, and in other cultures, it is the village, literally, that comes to help. So I'm always reminded of that joke, though, about the birth of baby Jesus. That if it had been three wise women, they would have come bearing casseroles, cleaned the stable, and provided new nappies for the new baby, rather than frankincense, gold, and myrrh, which is useless.
Oh my goodness, yes. Oh my God, that's so funny. Absolutely. Oh my goodness. So we've essentially got about 10, 12 minutes to touch on menopause, and I don't want to skim over this one either because, menopause is a topic that's finally being more talked about as well. And that is a huge brain change for a lot of people. And like I've heard you talk about in other interviews, some women can go through life and not really experience much PMS. They didn't really experience postnatal depression, but then when menopause hits, they're like, oh my gosh, who am I? So what's happening there?
So it's really interesting that Australia is talking about menopause, and that's great. But we mustn't forget mental health as part of menopause, because we all know menopause as the hot flushes and the cessation of periods. And yes, that is the end point. But there can be 10 years, starting in the mid 40s or even early 40s, at which point in time menopause hits in the brain first. It usually hits all women in the brain first. By that I mean they often present with panic or anxiety, and then rage, concentration difficulties, so-called brain fog, can even feel the low self-esteem slips further, get a bit paranoid. Oh, they're all talking about me at work. You can't teach that old dog new tricks, etc., etc. So there's a whole menopause depression thing happening, with anxiety as a big part of it, and it's a different beast looking to major depression as experienced by younger women or men. And the problem is it responds a little bit to antidepressants, but not very much. So our outcomes, if you treat menopausal depression with standard antidepressant medications or even the psychotherapies or whatever, you don't get the best outcomes. As one of my patients said, isn't this bleeding obvious? If this is a hormone problem, why on earth aren't you using a hormone treatment? And she's dead right. That's what we should be doing. But the problem is that the clinical trials haven't been done in a big way to show that hormone therapy works. We all know it does because we work in the field and our patients come in, we work with them, we collaborate on the which way do you want to go, and then often the menopause woman with depression will try a hormone strategy and it usually works out better for her. So we know as clinicians the anecdotal evidence that what we're seeing case by case is working, but there isn't the clinical trial. I'm trying to get money to do it, but it's so damn difficult to get money in this area. But we are getting some traction. What I don't want us to do is medicalize menopause. I'm not trying to medicalize menopause. Millions of women go through it. You can't outsource menopause. All women assigned female at birth will go through it. And millions of women sail through with no problem at all. If that's the case, good luck. That's fantastic. But about 38%, it's not a small percentage, experience a mental health challenge which begins in their early 40s. So this is the group we're talking about and talking to. If you think it's your hormones, as my patients kept telling me, it's my hormones, doc, stand your ground, go into your general practitioner or whichever practitioner you're seeing and say, it's my hormones, you need to do something about it to help me with it. Because there's numbers of different hormone strategies out there. I mean, there's even the pill I talked about up until 48. Then there's bioidentical hormones that are as close to natural estrogen, natural progesterone as we can get them. And they can be either, prescription, or they can be people like yourself making up compounds and so on. But, there are hormones. And again, I think this is a great time for women to actually be the voice that has to be listened to. You don't have to have treatment done to you or given to you. At all times, it should be, I want, I say, I'm working with my healthcare practitioner to come up with my plan. So, that's really critical. And I think, again, the information that we can give people, go read about the different hormone strategies. Read good things, don't read weird things that give you mythology, but it's important to read valid information and get all the right information about the different hormone strategies, and look after your own physical health as well, because unfortunately at midlife is a time, particularly through the menopause process, when women gain weight. They gain between 2 and 8 kilos is the norm. Now, it is what it is, but you need to be careful about not having too much weight gain and then unfortunately ending up with diabetes or some other complication. Getting breast ultrasounds every year if you're on a hormone therapy is a good idea. It's non-radiation and you always have a picture of your breasts, because doing breast self-examinations is supposed to be what we do, but many women go, I don't know what that lumpy bit is. Is that normal? Is that not normal? So, again, you can do that because you will breast breast ultrasounds. When you're 50, you get a breast mammogram every second year. Keep up with your pap smears. That's important. Keep up with your blood pressure checks. You've always got to know your numbers. Know your blood pressure. Know your cholesterol. Know your numbers. Okay? It's really about, you're now a mature woman who isn't going to be pushed around. That's what we'd like to see, that women are in charge of their health and they know what they're doing. Really, if you've been through childbirth and everything else, you do know your body quite well. And if you think it's your hormones, then you're more than likely going to be right. So stay your ground if you want a hormone treatment.
This is such a strong, important message. And it's the same, as a big, staunch advocate for endometriosis awareness. It's the same kind of thing. It's like, listen to us, listen to what we're saying, because we know our body and this is what we're experiencing. Something I actually wanted to ask you about the bioidentical hormones. I've heard a lot of talk around now testosterone with menopause. What do you know about that? Is there any promise there?
Yeah, so there's a lot of controversy about this whole field, and testosterone is right at the center of one of the controversies, and that is about is it useful in mental health? Is it useful as a hormone treatment anyway? So I think it has got its place, but I don't agree with just blindly giving a sort of set pattern of hormones to every woman. Every woman's different. So testosterone is activating. So for women who feel extraordinarily exhausted, and I've had women who say, I'm bone weary, mind weary, can't even lift my hairbrush to brush my hair. That's how tired I am. Sometimes adding in the testosterone to their treatment is also a useful strategy. Sometimes people use the testosterone as an estrogen sparing, or you get to a certain dose of estrogen, but the woman needs more. And so you can use the testosterone to allow that to actually climb up, because the breakdown product of testosterone is estrogen. Testosterone is converted to estrogen. So you're kind of sneakily getting the estrogen levels to go up a bit more by using testosterone. So there are lots of different reasons for it. Libido is one of the other things that testosterone is helpful for. And again, that's another important part of being alive and being female. Don't put your sexuality that's done, I'm menopausal, that's it, done with that. No, you are entitled to have a good sex life no matter what age you are post adulthood. That's really up to you. And so you shouldn't be sort of, I just got to look after my depression. If I get that right, that's fine. If whatever you're being treated with for your depression makes a complete dead end of your sex life, that's not good. Okay, so
oh my God.
Again, go in there, fight for your sex life.
100%. I am so all about that. And I am so done with this messaging that the woman has to, bow down and has to people please the other partner for their sexual fantasies or whatever. I think we are in this time now that women are standing up for what they want.
Yes.
And what serves us. And, when you lay out everything that you've just talked about, it's no wonder that us women have so much on our plate. We're often on the brink of burnout because we have so much to consistently process. And, walking down the street at night, am I safe? Dealing with your periods and then menopause. And there's just so much always going on in our lives.
Absolutely there is. But I think it's also important that at some point, and usually it's the task of the young adult, but it's sort of 24, 20 to 28, somewhere in there, you develop a sense of, this is me. This is me. And that this is me should continue through the life journey. You shouldn't stray too far from this is me. This is my values. You learn more and you add more and you're flexible and you shift with the winds a bit. But you've got to have a central sense of self and respect yourself for who you really are. So I come back to the sex life. I mean, the other side of the coin is I've got women who say, you know what? I just want to put on a fluffy pair of pajamas and eat my cheesels. I'm happiest doing that, with a bit of a cuddle every now and again. But I'm not, I'm happy doing this. That's fine too. So don't be led by, the glossy media that says you've got to have 6 multi-orgasms every night or whatever. So
I
it's
sorry. Go.
it's being true to yourself. Be true to
Mhm.
yourself.
This is what I love. This is all about this inclusivity and realizing that everyone has different desires and needs and wants. And, even coming back to the whole neurodivergent space, exactly as you said, coming to accept who you are. uh, being undiagnosed neurodivergent my whole life and all the challenges and even traumas that came with that, I realized upon reflection, if I had had the validation for who I was at a younger age, and been given the ability to just show up as my weird, unique self, then I wouldn't have felt like I don't belong here and all those kinds of things, which continues to contribute to all the other things that affect you in your life.
Absolutely. And I wish we, could teach this to the younger girls and adolescents out there, that it is important to have an identity and be true to yourself. Don't be a narcissistic kind of, I'm the best, chuck out the rest sort of thing. It's not that. And of course you're going to learn and you should be open to new learning, but there's a central core that is you. Respect
Mm.
that, love that, and stand up for that.
That was the perfect way to round up this interview. Jayshree, I am just blown away by your knowledge. I love your brain. And I honestly just could talk to you all day. And I really appreciate you taking the time out to give us all this incredible information. One thing you said before was, seeking out the right kind of information. Where can people go to find this kind of information and make the best informed decisions for their health?
I think it is important to utilize I think the science literature that is available to everybody. It can be heavy going, but I think there are some review articles and things like that. But try to get those kinds of things, like read the science journals, read the health journals. Don't rely on TikTok.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. Are there any organizations that you would recommend that do a good summary of these scientific articles?
Yeah, I think our own website, we're trying to put more stuff up there for the general public. So that's Her Centre Australia. Jean Hales is another organisation that specifically puts information together for women. I'll think of a few others, but I think we've got to get more of that sort of information out there to counter some of the nonsense that comes forward as well. But your podcast, others, be great to advertise all of these for everyone, because it is reliable information.
Absolutely. And I'll put those links in the notes so that people can easily find them as well.
Great.
Well, thank you so much. I really, really appreciated this.
Thank you for having me on your program, and you have a good weekend.
You too.